Bandwidth for this podcast is brought to you by Ideate Software. Be sure to check out all of their great Revit applications designed to increase your productivity. Welcome to BIMThoughts. We have Salla Eckhardt and Sarah Causey is back.
That's right. Hello.
She's back in the microphone. So, Sarah, redefine yourself.
Oh boy. I'm the Director of Design Technology at RATIO. I love my job still. I get to do all the fun, sexy technology things for RATIO. So, loving that. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk with Salla because she's super wonderful. I'll let her introduce herself, but we met each other through Women in BIM, which is a wonderful international organization. If anyone listening is female, you should totally join. And I got paired with Salla. I don't know how. The universe aligned and enabled her to be my mentor last year. And she's just an incredible human. And I'm really excited for her to be on this chat.
So, Salla, define yourself.
Oh, well, that's a difficult thing to do. I'm kind of...
I know, that's why I ask it.
I've been a tourist in the built environment industry for like over 20 years now. And I started off as becoming an architect, but being an academic researcher early on. And then moving over to the architectural design and structural engineering side for a few years to see like what are the actual tangible issues in the industry. And then I hopped back into applied research and development side, and then did a couple of years of program management for a smart city program. And then I moved to United States, and that was my opportunity to leave behind the theoretical academic world and go very boots on the ground into general contracting. And I did a couple of years of that just to see that what is the digital transformation opportunity in general contracting and construction management. And I was working for one of the largest privately owned GCs in Seattle area as their director of emerging technology and innovation. And that's how Microsoft learned about what I was doing as a HoloLens developer and some other technologies as well. And when they established the Center of Innovation at the Internal Real Estate and Security Organization, they reached out to me and asked, like, would I be interested in hopping over to the real estate owner side? And of course, I couldn't say no. So now it's yeah, it's now been like 2.5 years that I've been working for the Real Estate and Security Org at Microsoft as the Director of Transformation Services and developing a new framework that I called the Digital Building Lifecycle. And that way, when we are going through the digital transformation as a real estate owner operator, we can lean in with the traditional AEC industry and help them digitally transform as a educated real estate owner. And I'm responsible for establishing our BIM program, and then also our digital construction program, and leading the Digital Twins program as well, so that we are kind of capturing the entire life cycle and supporting all our vendors and suppliers be on the same track as we are. I'm kind of a jack of all trades, master of none.
Yes, aren't we all? So I have a question. This is a big question. You ready? Being at Microsoft, now that everyone's working remotely, and hopefully we can get back to normal soon, but what does normal look like from a real estate and office perspective for Microsoft now? Is it going full steam ahead like it was before this nifty year of fun, or is it now looking different?
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, this is the normal. Every day is the normal for us, and every day is an opportunity to empower people with either our digital environment or the physical environment. And what we are planning to adopt is the hybrid workplace that
Sure.
is a hot topic for everyone who is working in corporate real estate environment, but also wanting to support people who are joining in remotely. And since we are a global organization, we have regional teams everywhere around the world. We want to build up new ways of engaging people in inclusive environments and inclusive meetings. So we are looking into how can we leverage the technologies that already exist or are emerging to really empower people who are working for our engineering teams and product development teams, our own real estate and security teams, and everyone at Microsoft, and that way emerge stronger than ever once people are starting to return back to their physical offices, but also having the choice of joining in remote.
Yeah, it's going to be different. I don't know how what it's going to be. If it's going to be hybrid, is it going to be 2 days a week, 3 days a week away, or in the office, or if it's in the office just for meetings on certain days. Who knows what it's going to be like?
Yeah, now it's that there are a lot of opportunities for individuals to choose where they feel most productive and most like happiest doing their work, and how we can develop the strategic workplaces both physically and digitally. And overall, what we've done is that we've started to look into technologies like the cave environment, computer aided virtual environments. The generic term is immersive space. And that way, is, when coming back to the office, we're not returning back to the analog office of pre-pandemic era, but we are coming back into something that is at the same time physical and digital environment. And that way,
Okay, I
it's not
totally want to work in a cave. Like that sounds
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. And I will be in a cave as much as I can because it's a very cool environment that you can experience your projects when they are only in digital format, and
Yeah.
really, like empower yourself with all kinds of extended reality technologies and digital platforms that we use now for running meetings and engaging with people who are not at the same physical location as we are. And that way, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. You can join into the meeting and see what others are doing, see their facial expressions, have the discussion about what you think would be the best option going forward. And that way, it's very flexible.
Do you think the virtual caves, are going to replace the physical offices?
Time will tell. The caves themselves, they're not like a new technology per se. They've
Right.
existed
You know,
for
we've been living in caves forever.
yeah, and these type of cases they've existed in research institutions and the academia for a few decades now. But what we started to look into is that how can we introduce that as the kind of immersive workspace, and that way bring extended reality in front of everyone. It's more accessible than using a headset or something that is a wearable. So overall, people who don't want to wear extended reality headset, mixed reality, or virtual reality, or anything like that, they have a choice of just stepping into this cool room that has a very large wall-size screens and a projector and all the technology that they might need for being immersed in the environment that they are evaluating or having discussions about. So when people are working with, for example, building information models, watching the 3D model on your computer screen, you're not fully immersed in it. You look at it from a like an outside perspective, but then when you're in a cave environment, all of a sudden you're immersed in your project, and that really triggers people's emotion and feelings that we want to capture before we actually go and build things out. So if someone is having a very strong reaction to something, we can still fix things. And there
Right.
is no cost basically for fixing things when they are in digital format because it's so fast and you haven't produced anything physical into the world yet. So it's a very sustainable way of capturing the end user needs.
Mhm. Yeah, when they have that reaction, you won't need the EpiPen then.
Yeah. Yeah.
It makes me think of Ready Player One. Anybody else?
Yeah.
That's exactly what comes to mind. Just like people just living in their bubbles and never actually leaving their homes. Because why would they need to?
We need our home caves.
I want a home cave.
I'm just imagining these like geodesic domes, and everyone just takes their pillow and blanket and just goes and works in their geodesic dome. It's just covered in screens.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be down for that.
Yeah, right. At AU, like right before the pandemic, they had this room. Do you remember that? Where it was like it was a cube. There was a ceiling, floor, and the four walls, and you were like underwater with fish, and you were in the rainforest, and it was sound and everything. That's what I'm thinking you're probably talking about. Although you could project on just a corner of white walls and a ceiling and a floor, right?
Right. But I don't think you would get if you're doing the projection like that, how do you get the depth? Like when you have a VR headset on. Is it the same?
You have multiple projections, right? In order to feel.
Well, you'd have to have at least 4, one for each wall. But
in the floor.
Right, because when I throw the VR headset on, I get the sense of depth of the room, the size of the room. I don't know if you would get that from a room that has projectors on it. I don't know.
You kind of do, because the technology is so high definition that it feels almost as good as VR. VR itself it's its own animal, and I'm a huge fan of VR technologies. And but there is a spectrum of technology that suits different purposes and different end users. So as long as we can get people to talk about the right stuff and make decisions based on what they experienced and what they talked about, and eliminate the extra needs for additional meetings because things haven't been clarified enough, then whatever technology supports that, then it's a win-win.
Carl, I'm sure you've got a question or two.
I've had a few conversations with Salla before. We've been lucky enough to be on a couple of panels as part of the CBC, or Construction Pains Coalition, talking about the other topic we were going to discuss today, the Digital Twin and the Digital Twin Consortium. And we just sort of chatted a little bit about, what is a digital twin? What can we think about it? And I think maybe that's the next topic of course, or next course of topic that we have here, is this digital twin, and what is a digital twin, which usually comes up right after that. It's one of those things where it was given a name. Some would say fortunate, some would say unfortunate with digital twin, but it sort of becomes synonymous with what is that? And a lot of people originally, this was something that I ran into, assumed that it was just BIM. Well, we have this building information model. We don't need a digital twin. It's the same thing, but really it's not. It's different. It's not the model. It's what you connect to it and what you extract from it. That really is when we get into that digital twin and what it can be used for, and of course the Internet of Things as it pulls it in. But perhaps, Salla, perhaps you could explain to us in a more eloquent way what we think a digital twin should be these days.
Well, that's a good one. And the Digital Twin Consortium has defined what digital twin is, but how I kind of interpret it is that it's what BIM was supposed to be 20 years ago, but then BIM took the wrong turn, and it became basically just a 3D model for creating class detections and faster creation of drawings. But what we were aiming at already 20 years ago at developing BIM was the digital representation of the physical world. So it was supposed to be the digital truth. But now, as we are continuing to refine digital twins, you're federating the static data that might be collected from building information models and connecting it with other platforms like GIS and IoT networks and IoA networks that provide more real-time data. And then you can throw in reality capture as well, so that you can really see what assets you have and how those assets are actually performing. And that way drive your decision-making process and progress as well. so that there's less questions that is this data accurate? Is this data reliable? Is this data the latest and the greatest? Because everything that is created or federated into a digital twin, that is supposed to be the digital truth. But the digital twin itself, it's not a single thing. It's more of a federation of different components.
So is the digital twin designed to live past construction and into facilities? Or is it designed to live before construction so that we can find issues, or both?
I personally believe that it is supposed to live through the entire life cycle. And when thinking about before a project is even going into planning phase, we we have the natural environment or the built environment already surrounding the parcel that you're going to be developing into. So you already have a lot of data about the geospatial location of your project
Mm-hmm.
that can then be used for making better decisions already in the planning phase. So when you're deciding that, how are you actually planning to implement your project? Is it going to be on-site construction, or are you willing to visit the idea of industrialized construction, and then asking your design and engineering team to design for fabrication and design for manufacturing, and then choosing that do you actually go with modular or volumetric um, implementation, and that way start kind of guiding the AEC teams to have the discussions of how do they actually design for construction and design for assembly. um, and then once the project is delivered, you have the as designed data available, you have the as built data available, and then you can start plugging in your integrated systems from the actual operative environment and continue feeding your digital twin, so that when you are making decisions about when is the optimal time to do the tenant improvements or retrofits and renovations or infill construction or whatever you choose to do with your portfolio, you have a lot of data and evidence to guide your decision making and steer the design and engineering teams and the operational teams and facility management teams. And overall, even thinking about when it's time to demolish and decommission a building, the digital building lifecycle can live further along and use the digital twins as the technology for continuing to improve and do better the next time. Because it's pretty evident that even if you demolish a building, you're going to develop something new in its place, but you
Hmm.
want to avoid making the same mistakes that you did in the past.
Wow. I have 3 different questions now based on what you've just said, which is quite amazing for me. In the last part that you said about the demolishing of the building and using the twin, that made me think to myself, should we use phases in the digital twin so that as the building progresses through its lifespan, we can look at the different phases from like the phase of turnkey, the phase of like a remodel, the phase of this and the phase of that, so that we can go back through the history of that building and thus gain that information that you talked about.
I think it could be a possibility. Um, and I'm thinking that how you can edit your like building information models, that you can hide things, you
Uh-huh.
can change the status of different elements, but then there needs to be the definition of value of how far in the history do you want to go back to, because
Right.
then you have to manage all the data that coexists with the latest and the greatest version. But I mean, it's pretty doable.
I would think you'd want it all. And you're probably thinking the people on the other side of the speaker are probably thinking, why? It's going to get, the model's going to become huge and unwieldy. Well, we're thinking about the lifespan of a building, of this model getting large, and they're going to replace the computers. They're going to be faster and faster and faster, so it can handle all that data. I I I think that's like the history of the building. I think it all needs to be in there so that you can look back and say, what was this equipment that was in this room when we first moved in, or what was it 10 years afterwards? How long did the equipment last? Who was the manufacturer?
I was thinking
Yeah.
about it from the like architectural history point of view, and layering and what were the trends in what era and what decade.
Yeah.
But yeah, I like where you're going with it. And overall, when thinking about following the trends of how was the building technically performing and how was it
Mm-hmm.
socially performing, because you always have the end users that then
Yeah.
make up the reason for the building to exist.
And how was it designed to perform?
Mm-hmm.
What mistakes do people make when they make a twin?
They're probably not necessarily paying enough attention into the information or the data that they are collecting and feeding into the twins. So
Mm-hmm.
then there needs to be more clarity on the purpose,
Right.
and that way you don't end up creating a twin that is a what I call highly detailed, incomplete picture of
Mm-hmm.
what's the real estate or infrastructure phenomena. So there needs to be a reason for the data collection and the application of the data, and that way you don't end up using the digital twin as a data warehouse or storage, and then
Oh.
collecting a lot of dark data into it. But it is something that is made accessible for all, so democratizing the data so that the end users can then refine it into information that is relevant for their role in the project. And the project overall is that the building or the infrastructure that continues to exist for hopefully hundreds of years. So it's
Right.
not only the design or the construction phase that it's called the project, but when I talk about the building, is the project.
Right, because they're not going to be able to call Paul Oppen in 100 years to find out
Yeah,
how to fix something.
yeah.
So you're saying that we should put links to the data as opposed to putting the data in the model.
Hmm. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. One of the things that popped into my brain, head, whatever we want to call it these days, is the term progressive elaboration. Have you heard of that?
No, that's a completely new term for me.
It's a fun term, and it's with project management. And so as you're planning your project, the term progressive elaboration means the gist of it. Put down the information you know now about the project, or put the information you know now about the digital twin, but do it in such a way, and don't worry about it in such a way that you can change it later. So put it in such a way that you can change it later. But in project management, you're not worried about that. I need to plan the whole thing today before the project starts. I don't need to know every hour that's going to be spent. I know it's going to take about this amount of time to do that work. And I need to know I need to do the work, and I budgeted this amount. And as you go along and as you learn more about the project, you fill in those gaps to get those hours in there, and things may change. And I think that same thing holds true to the digital twin. You don't have to have the twin perfect at the start. You just need to have the twin good enough so that it's valuable and you continue to use it. And as you continue to use it, you add new data that you may need. So if you find out that, oh my goodness, I should have really put all of the plug numbers in for the Ethernet cables in my digital twin, all the plug numbers in. So I knew what plug number that was. Well, then you're like, oh, I got this big daunting task. Well, don't worry about the daunting task. Hire somebody to come and do that daunting task, because now you find that that data is valuable to you. And that is progressing the model along as you go. So yeah, I think we need to start making some twins. How about you, Carl?
I think it is time to start making some digital twins. And what really kind of excites me about the idea or the process of digital twins, kind of
Mm-hmm.
what you just said, Bill, about you don't have to have the perfect solution before you jump in, otherwise you'll never be ready for it.
Right.
Um, but the idea of how we can tie things together. For years back in my consulting days, talking to all those of us on the AEC side that work on the design and construction phase about putting together models and building models, and then doing consulting work with the owners, it was like apples and oranges. We were building these things for the owners, but the owners maybe didn't know what they want, but they certainly know that they didn't need a Revit family to LOD 500 or whatever we're calling it these days with all the fins and the nuts and the bolts, because that's not helpful. They just need something that they can put into their platform where they can click on the square representation of the boiler and get that information out. And I think that the digital twin is where we're going to get that. And then we can tie it in with other things like our systems that help us do automation, make sure the lights turn on, the lights turn off. One location where we can get all that together, but it doesn't necessarily need to be that uber high detailed information. As Salla said, we don't necessarily need to see in HD detail everything about that boiler and chiller, but we need the information. We need that metadata out of it to be very accessible and updatable. And as to your point, Bill, maybe archivable, meaning we can go back in time to see what's going on.
Yeah.
So that's what I think. So if I can get some of that by making some twins, let's do it.
Let's do it. All right, my last question that came from those three questions. Modular versus traditional building. What are we seeing out there in the industry of people actually doing modular stuff?
That's probably a good question for Sarah. But I think it's now definitely probably increasing depending on what type of building you're developing. So it really depends on the building archetype where it's applicable. And there is probably room for both and coexisting at the same time. But when thinking about the benefits of increased quality or more consistent quality and the cost management implications and managing schedules and building things in factory conditions so that you're actually keeping your construction crews more safe. I'm a fan of modular construction, but it doesn't mean that I'm not a fan of on-site construction either.
Right, but I'm wondering how prevalent modular construction is these days.
It probably depends on the market where you are
It
building.
probably depends where you're at, huh?
Yeah. So it's if you're looking into the Nordic countries, there's a lot of modular construction happening, and then if you go somewhere else, then it's more on-site.
I can see that because of the weather constraints, where you only have so much time, where there isn't any snow to get in the way and things like that. You'd build it off-site and
there's the history of the industry as well, that it was in the mid-century 1940s 1950s where there was the coin toss that do you go with factory based construction or do you continue building more on site, and in the Nordic countries they started to look into more element production and construction that way, and that led them into further developing into a modular construction as well. So there's a lot of history in construction and the manufacturing industry as well that play into the game.
Dana, you've been quiet for a long time. I know you're itching to ask a question.
It's actually a lot to take in because it's not really something that we talk about a lot, right? Like, am I wrong? Like, I feel like I don't even know, like, yeah, let's create twins. Yeah, let's do that. What does that even look like?
I think we talk about it a lot. I don't think it's done.
Right.
I don't think people are doing it. And I think it's another cost center for architects.
Yeah, I was going to talk about that. I mean, we're working on a hospital now here in Indy, and the owner wants a digital twin, but they're not. I mean, we're taking it very far with Kobe data and everything, and they're not paying us to create the twin at the end. They're paying a third party, someone that they trust that does a lot of that work for them after the fact, which I get and respect, building those bonds and a relationship with a consistent partner that understands your systems and how you operate your building. So I get it. There's also wonderful companies out there like Willow, that their entire portion of their business is dedicated to joining aside the design team from the beginning to the end to be that voice. Kind of like you have a technology
Mhm.
consultant, you have this digital twin consultant. So I'm not sure what's better or worse, because it's nice to have more interdisciplinary, cross industry expertise in the design team, but it would be nice to recoup that
Right.
fee in some way, knowing that we have the skill sets to do it.
And I did misspeak. I meant profit center, not cost center. Right.
Right,
Mhm.
right. I'm with you.
And I can see contractors offering this as a service too. Because contractors there building the building, they could have a crew go in on the off hours and get their as-builts done. Yeah.
Right? Like I almost see it being like it almost becomes a telephone game otherwise.
Right. And well, and unless you've got a crew out there that goes in, during the off hours and finds out what's been done that day and draws it in or what have you.
Constantly scanning.
Constantly scanning, constantly. Well, they could just go around with laptops and draw in or.
I definitely think the business case is the strongest in an integrated project delivery model, an IPD model, because then the contractor, the design team, you're working together to capture everything throughout. So in that case, you're not, it's more of that circular design process instead of the linear process that's such a waste and such a lack of efficiency for our owners.
I can see them doing the digital twin as they're building it and using the digital twin to compare against the design model to see what's different so they could catch problems hopefully quicker on a big project. Little projects not so much because it gets built so fast.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know what AI does for us in the future with that concept, Bill. No, but it's a really good point you bring up, because one of the things we're discussing right now in our contract is trying to define a level of accuracy. How many inches vertically and horizontally does the model need to be to as-built stuff? And if your subs are not communicating the changes they're making in the field, how can you be sure that the digital twin is right? It's a really hard thing, and it puts definitely the onus on the owner to be watching and holding people accountable. Otherwise, how valuable is, Salla said something at the beginning about the digital twin being that source of truth, but how do you verify the truth?
Isn't that ass backwards though?
Back asswards?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, think back to the golden oldie days when we were designing buildings with pen and vellum, and when it's finished, we hand it over. The contractor builds off of that. They're not building to recreate that piece of paper. They're taking the intent that the architect and the engineers put together. They're taking that intent from an idea and building it into a physical thing. But at the end, we don't go back and make changes to that. So it seems like now that we've got this new technology where we have a model, we're like, well, we designed the model, so they should build it exactly to the model, even though this is kind of just an idea of how it should be built, and we don't know how on the day of installation they're going to install that. So how can we put into a contract language that we're going to design it exactly as someone else is going to build? That just seems backwards. And I think maybe if we stop imagining that BIM or even digital twin is a magical word and a magical cure-all for what happens when humans get involved with stuff, maybe we'd be a little better off.
I would say that the vast majority of the BIM stuff we draw is an electronic version of that what we drew by hand. It's not until you really get to the digital twin stage does that model become of value to the owner at the end. Because we can give the model to the owner, the design model. Sure, we can put that in the contract to give them the model. But how useful is the model really? Because the design model is really the design intent of the building, and it's the stuff needed to get through the building department. It's not really how the building was constructed, right? I mean, the first tradesman in there wins, If the electrical guy's
Mhm.
in there, boy, his electrical stuff looks beautiful, and there's nothing in the way. The HVAC guy gets in there first, his stuff is beautiful, nothing's in the way, except for the structure.
So is it, the question is it more efficient to build a building and then someone come back and build the twin, or expect the design team and the contractor to update the design intent model all the way through to the twin? I don't know.
I'm thinking it's best to have a team out there in the if the owner wants a digital twin, first you got to sell him on that. And once you sold him on the digital twin, and he's like, yeah, let's go, let's do it, and his facility manager is all in and ready to go as well, because you got to have the person who's going to consume the model backing you as well. Otherwise, he's going to be in the way. They're out there when the building starts to get built, so that they can draw it as it gets built, because it's going to take just as long to draw it as it gets built as it would be to fix the design model.
Mm-hmm.
My big question is that how could we let go of the design intent and go from design for construction, and that way the general contractors wouldn't have to recreate the models as built, but it would be more that they could already start building based on the models that are coming from the design and engineering teams, and then just verify that the as built is what was as designed.
Mm-hmm. I think you have to have all trades involved in agreeing to do that, including the building department.
I think it comes down to the stage where we supersede 3D to whatever D we want to call it, but we're no longer fixated on that geometry. It's creating and fine tuning and adjusting the geometry that takes all the time and exhausts us all. When we get to the stage where we can just do the data, so this is a boiler by Train that's a model 367. Oh, it's changed. We just type in the code number different. Everyone has the data that has changed, and in their platform, their thing, that means something different to them. I know 2016 Autodesk talked about Project Quantum, which has changed to Project Plasm now, but that was the whole idea behind that. The idea of just sharing the data and then, to make interoperability more real. It's a grand idea. Obviously, there's a lot more that has to happen on the back end for it to actually come to fruition. But I think that would be a big key, and I think the owners and the facilities management companies understand that. They don't need that fancy rendition of a boiler or a chiller. They just need to know what it is and generally where it is. But everyone, the other part of that equation is people don't want to give up their chunk of the pie. And they also don't want to assume more liability. So if the architect designed the intent and handed it over to the trades to build and something went wrong, well, is the trade responsible because they built it, or is the architect responsible because their intent wasn't clear? And there's the rub. Yeah,
it comes down to lawyers.
It always does.
Maybe we'll get to digital twins when robots start building the buildings.
Well, I think Sarah said earlier that this whole philosophy that we're speaking of here tends to work better on the IPD type of projects, where there's an understanding at the beginning that we're all going to work together for the betterment. There's not going to be the finger pointing and the problems at the end. We're all going to help each other out.
What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, Carl, you said something interesting, and maybe I'm misinterpreting it. You said, you're talking about, when you were talking about quantum, and maybe Salla can talk about this as, co-leader of the Digital Twin Consortium. But, are we talking about a level of standardization worldwide where no matter who you are or how it's been handed off, there's a consistent way of updating data? And how does that work across languages?
But I think that would be the great thing, because then if it all has to be the same, like numbers, they may be represented differently, but a 1 means a 1 no matter where you are. It may look different, but it means the same thing. And I think us here on the podcast that are all technical minded, I think we would welcome that. But it's the artistic and the type that give us beautiful things that might not want to be shackled down, tied down to a certain way of doing stuff.
Doesn't it all go on the Kobe spreadsheet anyway?
That's right. It always comes back to Excel. That's right, Bill. Wins.
Don't say that.
Wow. Heavy thoughts. Heavy BIM thoughts.
So Salla, what does tomorrow look like with this type of technology?
Hard to say. It really depends on what people want to start using. Because what I've seen over and over again in the past 2 decades is that even though technology solutions are created to the market, people are not necessarily adopting to them. And it's the great unknown that what sticks and what doesn't. And I'm hoping that for what Sarah was talking about, that how can data be the common language globally, that might ontologies of smart buildings like the real estate core, could they be the key for getting people to create and exchange data in a way that it's more consumable regardless of what tools you want to use. But overall, I think that what the future looks like and what tomorrow looks like, it really depends on us who are part of the built environment industry, and what do we want to support and how much do we want to hang on to the past.
Dana, do you have any final thoughts?
I don't know. I feel like we're such laggards in the AEC industry. Are we not? Why is that? Why are we so slow to adopt these types of things? Like, why does it take, at least in the States?
I think things will change when architects start losing work to another architect that is doing that. So if XYZ Architects starts losing work to ABC Architects because ABC Architects offers a digital twin, even though they're charging for it, and the contract is more money, I think that's when things will change.
But we won't win projects if our client, we're not gonna when nobody's gonna want our projects if they're that much more money and they don't know what to do with these digital twins. They don't.
Right.
I think right. So it starts from up there. It starts from the clients, the owners. They have to find benefit.
We started using Revit when the clients asked for it.
But that's not necessarily the way I think it should be. Look at the BIM wedge in Europe. That was like a governmental push.
Well, that's an interesting concept, Dana. Like, what role does government projects play in pushing this forward? Because if those contracts, especially considering this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill, if those types of projects start to see the efficiencies of using a digital twin over the life cycle from a money standpoint, that may be a place to start.
That's amazing insight, Sarah.
That
right?
is amazing
Because if that actually goes through, this infrastructure bill, which I think could mean amazing things for America and America's future, then yeah, we could totally push that as a governmental requirement in some way.
Yeah, but making it a requirement isn't going to make the commercial place do it. What's going to make the commercial industry do it, or private sector, is value. Mm-hmm. Do they see value in doing a digital twin? Do they see value in the architect using Revit or another BIM software? Or do they just not care, and if they do it by hand, that as long as the price is right and the building gets built, they don't care?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the difference, basically. Looking at Europe versus North America, is that it seems that there's too much money in the North American market, so there isn't enough financial incentive to do things differently. Energy is too cheap, so that there is not enough incentive for running BIM simulations to really find the most energy efficient solution for that geometry of the building. And then there is too much money to be invested into the new project as well, so that the North American real estate owners, they probably are not feeling the pain enough to be as frugal as the Europeans, and that's what I kind of like pull the line to, that especially in the Nordic countries, is construction is very expensive compared to what is the kind of the living costs that people can afford. So that technology has been a huge driver for the Nordic countries, for example, because there isn't that much resources available. You don't have enough people to throw on the projects, and then you have to be very frugal with your project budgets. So technology has been the mean and method to really meet the quality standards and be able to deliver the projects that are needed. Whereas in North America, it seems that there is enough money to be wasted.
I'm thinking in North America it's going to start with government, healthcare, and university buildings. It'll take a while, I think. I could be wrong. I usually am. That commercial buildings will start doing it. Because commercial buildings, you build the building, you sell the building to somebody else, let them worry about it. You go on to the next building.
I think that kind of brings back to the point that Salla made about the money and what we did. And Bill, you've made this point several times in the podcast before. But if we go back to 2008 when the recession hit, and that's when people really started using Revit and BIM because it gave them that competitive advantage. They were able to do the stuff they could do with smaller staff and bigger things. And I think we've kind of forgot that along the way. But I think that ties nicely into what Salla was saying, is that once there's a need to benefit from the technology, then the technology becomes more prevalent and gets used, and then it becomes the commonplace.
Yeah. I wonder if BIM took off in 2008, because that's about when everybody started doing it, is because things slowed down and people had time to learn it.
Or they used that as an excuse.
Yeah.
Things slowed down, they had time to learn it.
Right.
There's never a perfect time. Sometimes you just got to jump in.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Salla. Thank you very much, Sarah, Dana, Carl. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I hope it was enlightening, and I hope you get your own progressive elaboration moving along.
Thank you so much.
That was good. Thanks for teaching us that term.
You're welcome.